The emergency HOA meeting erupted into chaos the moment Karen finished explaining the situation. 43 homeowners crammed into the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center, their voices rising in disbelief and outrage. "You're telling us we have to pay this farmer $40,000 because you drove through his pig pen?" shouted Marcus Webb, a lawyer who lived in the development's most expensive section. "It's not that simple," Karen began, but the room exploded with interruptions. "Why didn't you know about the property lines? How long has he been planning this? What about our property values?" Karen felt her carefully constructed authority crumbling. For months, she positioned herself as the neighborhood savior, the one person strong enough to handle the Crawford problem. Now she looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd gotten outmaneuvered by a pig farmer. "The alternative is taking the main road," she said, raising her voice above the din, "which adds 15 minutes to everyone's commute, every single day." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. 15 minutes might not sound like much, but over a year, it represented hours of lost time. More importantly, it meant their exclusive development was no longer convenient, which would hurt resale values. "There has to be another way," said Patricia Summers, the neighborhood's self-appointed social coordinator. "Can't we get the county involved? Eminent domain or something?" "I already checked," Karen admitted. "Crawford's land is properly zoned for agriculture. He's not breaking any laws." The meeting devolved into smaller arguments as neighbors formed factions. Some demanded they pay Crawford's price. Others insisted they fight him in court. A few suggested they could live with the longer commute. As the debate raged, Karen found herself thinking about Jim Crawford's words. "Sometimes you can't just complain your way out of a problem." She'd spent her entire adult life solving problems through persistence, pressure, and perfectly crafted complaints. She'd gotten managers fired, neighbors fined, and service providers replaced, all through the sheer force of her determination to get what she wanted. But Jim Crawford wasn't a customer service representative or a code enforcement officer. He was a man defending his home, and he'd been doing it longer than she'd been alive. "We pay," she said suddenly, cutting through the arguments. The room went quiet. "We pay him," she repeated. "$40,000 for the truck, and we formalize an easement agreement, but we also get something in return." "Like what?" Marcus demanded. Karen smiled, feeling a familiar surge of strategic thinking. "We get him to agree to property maintenance standards. New paint on the barn, cleaned up equipment, maybe some landscaping along the road. We can't force him out, but we can make him look respectable." It wasn't the victory she'd originally wanted, but it was something she could live with. More importantly, it was a solution that let her maintain some leadership credibility. The vote was close, 23 in favor, 20 opposed, but it passed. 3 days later, Karen stood in Jim's driveway, watching him inspect his new Ford F-350. The truck was midnight blue, fully loaded, and cost exactly $40,000 from the HOA's landscaping fund. "Pleasure doing business with you, Karen," Jim said, shaking her hand, with curl-used fingers that still smelled faintly of pig feed. "Just remember our agreement," she replied. "Property maintenance standards, Jim. I'll be watching." "I'm sure you will," he said, grinning. "But Karen, you might want to remember something too. I've got more land than just that pig pen, and I've been thinking about expanding my operation." Karen's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Well, the county's been after me to diversify. Maybe add some cattle, possibly some sheep. Course, that'd mean more fencing, more feed trucks, maybe even a processing facility." As Jim climbed into his new truck and drove away, Karen realized that their battle was far from over. She'd won this round by adapting his tactics, but Jim Crawford had just reminded her that in the game of property rights, he was still several moves ahead. The sound of his diesel engine faded into the distance, leaving Karen alone with the unsettling knowledge that she'd just funded her opponent's next strategic advantage. The war for Meadowbrook Estates had only just begun. Karen Blackwood's pristine white Escalade lurched violently as its front wheels disappeared into what she'd assumed was a harmless mud puddle. The engine revved desperately, spraying brown sludge across her windshield as 3 massive pigs emerged from the muck, snorting and circling her vehicle like they'd found their new favorite toy. What the hell? She slammed the gear into reverse, but the wheels only spun deeper into the mire. Through her mud-splattered window, she could see Jim Crawford leaning against his fence post, arms crossed, wearing the biggest grin she'd ever seen on his weathered face. This whole mess had started 6 months ago when Karen became president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The neighborhood had been crying out for leadership, for someone with standards, and Karen had graciously stepped up. Her first order of business was obvious. That eyesore of a property belonging to Jim Crawford had to go. Crawford's land sat right at the entrance to their upscale development, a ramshackle farm complete with rusted equipment, a sagging barn, and now, apparently, a pig pen where civilized people expected to see manicured lawns. Every time Karen drove past his property to reach her own pristine colonial, she felt her blood pressure spike. "Jim," she called out, rolling down her window despite the stench. "This is ridiculous. I'm stuck in your swamp." Jim ambled over, his boots squelching in the mud. "Well, Karen, funny thing about that. This here's my property. Says so right on the survey I had done last week." He pulled a folded document from his back pocket, keeping it well away from her reaching hands. Karen's face flushed red. "That's impossible. The HOA has easement rights through here. We've been using this route for years." "Nope." Jim shook his head slowly. "I all just assumed you could cut through my land, 'cause it was convenient. But assuming ain't the same as having rights, now is it?" For 6 months, Karen had been organizing her neighbors to pressure Crawford into selling. She'd filed noise complaints about his rooster, sent certified letters about property maintenance, and even tried to get the county involved over agricultural activities in a residential zone. Nothing had worked. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now literally stuck on the very property she'd been trying to eliminate. "Look," she said, attempting to regain her composure, "we can work this out. I'll call my lawyer. We'll get this easement situation sorted." "Already talked to my lawyer," Jim interrupted. "He says as long as I post proper no trespassing signs and give you all fair warning, I'm within my rights to protect my property however I see fit." Karen noticed the signs then, bright orange warnings, zip-tied to his fence, weathered but clearly visible. Signs that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "You can't just trap people." "Didn't trap nobody. Y'all chose to ignore the signs and drive through my pig pen." Jim's grin widened. "But don't worry, Karen. I'm reasonable. We can definitely work something out." The way he said reasonable made Karen's stomach clench with dread. 2 hours later, Karen sat in Jim's kitchen, her designer clothes caked with mud and pig manure, while he calmly sipped coffee from a chipped mug. The tow truck driver had quoted her $800 to extract the Escalade from what he'd called the worst pig wallow I've seen in 20 years. "Here's the thing, Karen," Jim said, setting down his mug. "I've been farming this land for 37 years. My daddy farmed it before me. Your fancy neighborhood popped up around me, not the other way around." Karen gritted her teeth. The kitchen smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, and she could see dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that probably hadn't been cleaned in a decade. Everything about this place offended her sensibilities. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "Respect," Jim replied simply. "I'll want to keep using my land as a shortcut to your big houses." "Fine. But it's gonna cost you." Karen's phone buzzed constantly with texts from neighbors asking why she was taking so long to get home. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for tonight, and she was supposed to present her final strategy for dealing with the Crawford problem. "How much?" she asked. "Not money," Jim said. "See, I've been thinking about expanding my operation, maybe adding some chickens, perhaps a few goats. Problem is, the feed store's a long haul from here, and my old truck ain't getting any younger." Karen felt her eye twitch. "You want us to help you expand your farm? I want your HOA to officially recognize my agricultural rights in writing. And I want you all to stop filing frivolous complaints every time my rooster crows or my pigs get a little vocal." The sheer audacity of his request left Karen speechless. After months of trying to force him out, He was essentially asking her to guarantee his right to stay. Furthermore, Jim continued, I want the HOA to purchase me a new feed truck, something reliable. Say, $40,000 should cover it. $40,000. Karen shot to her feet. Are you insane? The HOA doesn't have that kind of money. Sure you do. Y'all just voted to spend $60,000 on new landscaping for the entrance gates. Seems like you could spare some cash for being good neighbors. Karen's mind raced. The landscaping project was her baby, designed to increase property values and finally make Meadowbrook Estates look like the exclusive community it was meant to be. But Jim was right about the money. And if we refuse, she asked. Jim gestured toward the window, where her Escalade sat axle-deep in pig muck. Well, then I reckon y'all will need to find a new way to get to your houses. The main road adds about 15 minutes to your commute. But hey, at least you won't have to look at my eyesore anymore. Karen realized with growing horror that he held all the cards. Without the shortcut through his property, every resident would have to take the long way around, adding time to their daily commute and effectively making their expensive homes less desirable. I need time to think, she said. Fair enough, Jim replied. But Karen? Your truck's gonna sink deeper the longer it sits, and my pigs are getting mighty attached to their new jungle gym. As if summoned by his words, the sound of squealing pigs and crunching metal drifted through the window. Karen rushed outside to see 3 enormous hogs using her Escalade as a scratching post, their massive bodies rocking the vehicle back and forth in the mud. This is extortion, she shouted. This is property rights, Jim called back. Welcome to the real world, Karen. Sometimes you can't just complain your way out of a problem.